Good morning, good Friday morning. In the 1950s, just outside of Chattanooga, Tennessee, there was a center called the Highlander Folk Center, and this place was responsible for turning a lot of the gospel choruses and children's songs into what would be later called freedom songs. And so one of those songs that they adapted was author of the song is unknown, but had become popular through a 1920s hymnal called This Little Light of Mine. And so we're going to sing that a few choruses. We are in various kinds of dark times, but we still have a light to shine. So can I invite you to rise as you are able and join me? We're going to put a little Friday funk on it. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Let's try that again and sing it like you mean it. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let, oh, everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Jesus gave me the light. I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, Jesus gave me the light. I'm gonna let it shine. Jesus gave me the light. I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let, oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Let it shine, 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 let it shine.
Makes the noise for Dr. Peterson. And before you sit down, I want to hear some noise. Happy 100 CTS. Wonderful. It's so great to see so many 100 t-shirts. So that's fantastic. You may be seated. Just think, 100 years ago, our forebears stepped up and stepped out to create the Butler School of Religion, which would eventually become Christian Theological Seminary in 1958. I've been thinking a lot about that 100 years, and one of the things I think about is to get at least a fuller understanding of the significance of that act, we should think a little bit about 1924 and the environment of Indiana at that point. In 1910, Madam C.J. Walker, businesswoman, hair care entrepreneur, philanthropist, activist, first documented female millionaire in America, relocated her business to Indianapolis, 1910. 14 years later, 1924, also 100 years, the Indiana Ku Klux Klan had one of the largest memberships in the country, 1924. This was the same year, 100 years ago, when Butler School of Religion would become, which would eventually become Christian Theological Seminary, offering theological education to all students on an equal basis was founded. Think about that. What a powerful countercultural statement and act. Friends, those who have gone before us have done incredible things. And they have laid a foundation for us. And they created a vision for us to which we continue to live into. I think it's such a blessing to be a part of CTS. And so, friends, may this centennial year be a year of blessing. A year when we continue to bless God, bless one another, and bless the world. A year of joy, a whole year of joy. You know, it's okay to have a whole year of joy. Expressing our joy for the ways in which God has been faithful to CTS over these past 100 years. And lastly, a year of courage. A year when we recommit ourselves to serving God's transformation of the world. Say it after me. A year of blessing. A year of joy. A year of courage. I'm so glad that you're here today, and I'm so glad to be able to gather as a community as we gather for Convocation. I want to acknowledge students who are in the room, and we've got some students. I know students want to rise where you are so we can acknowledge you. We've got a few in the back, yes. I also want to acknowledge some new staff members who have joined us since commencement, and some new lecturers, new faculty members. Laura Robinson, if you're here, you can rise, we can acknowledge you. Adjunct Professor Jeremy Williams, Adjunct Professor Lecturer Chad Abbott, Jess Lacrone, another Adjunct Lecturer, Alyssa Bott, Sharon Watkins, another Adjunct Lecturer. And then we have two new staff members, John Elliott, who's the Budget Director in the Finance Office. I know he's up here somewhere. There he is. And Janae Downs, the Program Director for the Compelling Preaching Initiative. And CTS alum. And lastly, of course, Lane Davis, who is the new Assistant Professor of Church History and United Methodist Studies and Director of United Methodist Studies. And we'll be installing him later this morning. His wife, Alyssa, is here too, so welcome. I now welcome Dean Lozada to the podium for his remarks.
I think I saw Dick here too, right? Dick Ham? No? Okay. No, okay. He's also an adjunct, so, okay. Yeah, okay, he's been around. Okay, thank you. Esteemed guests, trustees, students, staff, and faculty. In addition to President Malat's warm welcome, it is my pleasure to extend a heartfelt greeting to everyone at this year's convocation. Today we gather to celebrate the opening of the academic year at CTS. As I've reflected on what to share this morning, I was reminiscent of the 100 years CTS has dedicated to advancing scholarship and formation for countless students. I also found myself pondering on the year 1924, and we did not talk about this. Really, we did not. 1924 marks the founding of the Butler School of Religion, which will later become CTS in 1958. This institution was established with the noble goal of providing theological education to all students, equally including women, students of color, and those with diverse theological perspectives. At the same time, 1924 was a time marked by significant xenophobia and racial divisiveness in the U.S., and again here in Indianapolis as well. And a historical context not entirely dissimilar to our own today. 1924 saw the rise of pseudo-scientific eugenics and race theories, a high rate of lynching of black individuals, and the implementation of the 1924 Johnson-Reed Act, which drastically restricted immigration. The fear of difference, the persistence of slow violence like poverty, and the ideology of whiteness were prevalent then, and they remain issues today. I mention these historical events because as we look forward to the next 100 years, we must be cognizant of what is happening around us. History serves as a guide to our future. It is our rudder navigating us forward. As CTS did not remain silent in the last 100 years of past injustices, it continues to draw on its history, tradition of advancing scholarship and formation to help navigate both calm and turbulent waters. This year, CTS is launching a series of webinars under the theme Navigating a Disorienting Age, People and Tools for Faith Communities. These webinars are designed to assist faith communities in addressing complex social issues, from cultural identity and human sexuality to racial justice and mental wellness. Our first webinar, taking place on September 18th at noon, will feature Dr. Iracema Coronado, a transborder studies expert from Arizona State University, who has a very strong faith commitment herself, discussing children at the border. With thousands of unaccompanied children arriving at the U.S. border each year, this discussion will help us better understand how to protect these vulnerable young lives. As we mark the beginning of this academic year, I invite you to join us on this next segment of the CTS journey and to be part of shaping the subsequent 100 years. On a personal note, I am reading a few pages of the novel Lost Children Archive by Valeria Luiselli, when I do get a chance between emails. The story follows a family's journey from New York City to the Mexican border, intertwining their own journey experience with that of migrant children. The novel reminds me that journeys are not meant to be taken alone. As we continue to advance scholarship and formation for our students, let us remember that we are on this journey together with students. Thank you for being part of this meaningful journey and endeavor.
There's a conversation that I have had over the years repeatedly with seminarians. It's usually about the rationale for some of the required courses in the Master of Divinity degree program. They want to know, do I really have to take that class? Dr. C, I'm sure you've heard this question before. I think about one time where a student came to me and said, Dr. Malat, I don't want to take the church history class. I don't think I really need it. What I really need is a class in bereavement, because that's far more important, is to be able to learn how to sit with people when they are passing. And I said, well, first of all, it's not a question of either or. I mean, I realize from a scheduling point of view that might be an issue, but the truth of the matter is that you need both of those things. You need church history and you need a course in bereavement. I said, she pushed a little bit more and said, I really don't think so. And I said, well, think about it this way. Imagine when you're sitting with somebody who is actually at the point of passing, and they say to you, I don't know what's going to happen to me when I die. I'm scared. Will I go to heaven? I don't even know if there is a heaven anymore. What about my soul and my body? The kind of questions that people often ask when they're ready to make the transition. I said, don't you think at that point it might be helpful to know the various answers the tradition has given to those questions about the nature of the soul and the nature of the body, the significance of the resurrection? Wouldn't it be helpful to know those things? And she's like, well, maybe. I'm glad to report that after the semester was over, she came back to me and she said, yes, Dr. Mlott, you were right. She said, church history is important. It was very, very valuable to me. And so I felt justified in my explanation. But the challenge, I think, is that we live in an age in which education is being challenged at every level. I mean, you see this in the news all the time. Shots against undergraduate education and graduate education. People no longer think it's important or it's problematic. And the truth is that the church is just as vulnerable to this process, this challenge as well. And the sad truth is that the number of uneducated clergy is growing. In other words, the number of churches that are being pastored by people who don't have a programmatic theological degree is growing. As the truth is that, again, sometimes it's for practical reasons, sometimes it's actually for other reasons, but theological education in some ways is being dismissed by the church and by members of the church. And while it is true that in some traditions the Master of Divinity degree is now being required for the first time, like the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and I think it's the last 10 years, is now requiring elders to have a Master's of Divinity degree. The truth is other denominations are going the other direction. They have fewer and fewer pastors who are pastoring churches with a theological degree. Since 2000, there are 25% fewer PCUSA active teaching elders. 25%. If you look at the United Methodists, it's 40% fewer are active elders. And active elders are required to have a Master of Divinity degree to be an elder. And you could go through the other traditions. You could go through the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, the UCC, Baptist tradition. You could go through all those traditions and you could see very similar kinds of trends. Episcopal Church is another example where they're having challenges having full-time pastors with a Master of Divinity degree for that pastor. There are simply fewer clergy in many of our traditions who are pastoring with an MDiv degree. If you also look at the situation with bivocational clergy, there are more and more bivocational clergy members. There's always been bivocational clergy members. In the African American tradition, it's very popular. It's been around a very long time. Around Latinx communities, bivocational ministry has been a cornerstone and continues to be. But one of the challenges for those people is that even if they wanted to get a Master of Divinity degree, they're not able to do so because of scheduling and money and other issues. And it's hard to justify a Master of Divinity degree for a part-time position. So we've got some serious headwinds that we work against. But what I want to point out here is not so much the practical programmatic issues, but to say there are consequences when our clergy do not receive an education. And it's not just about the pastor's personal education and their own transformation, but it's also about the people that they serve. So think about your general practitioner, your medical doctor. Imagine going to them and they don't have a degree in medicine. They never went to school for medicine, but instead they practice medicine based on what they learned growing up. So they're good at bandages. They can handle a few things. They're good at with ointments, but that's all they've got. I don't know about you, but I would prefer to have a doctor who's got a little more education. I would like them to know a lot more. Sometimes even when they have an education, I still want them to know more. Same with the pastors. I mean, we want our pastors to have an education. We want them to know the tradition. We want them to know the background. We want them to be able to make an educated and pastoral presentation to us. It's important to us. And that's not dismissing what we learn growing up or what we learn from our parents or what we learn from other kinds of apprenticeships. Those things are really important. That's not dismissing that. But the truth is there's something very specific that programmatic education offers. It's in addition to all those things. It works in concert with those things. We need educated clergy. We also need educated clinicians. I'll say something about that in a second. But we definitely need educated clergy. And they need to study the scholarship in our tradition so that they're not using the tradition, including the Bible, in destructive ways. This is crucial. One of the things I remind the students in the MDiv class, the first formation class, is the church is bigger than your experience of it. The church is bigger than your experience of it. And God is bigger than your experience of God. As a matter of fact, I hope you count on that. Because if God was limited to our own individual experience, I think we would all be in trouble. We rely on the fact that God is bigger than all of us and bigger than our experiences of God. So that means then that we have to have a wider view of the history and the experiences of our elders in faith and what they've done. Seminarians need to know the fullness of Christianity and all of its diversity of practices, diversity of beliefs, the great debates that took place historically that continue actually to bubble up in our churches all the time about the nature of God and the nature of Jesus and the relationship between Christianity and Judaism and Islam and Buddhism and Hinduism. All of those things are drastically important. We need our students to be able to understand that. We need our clergy to be educated. When I think about some specific examples, and you won't be surprised by this, I'll use one from my own life, is that there have been many debates about same-gender loving people, about whether we are really fully human, or about whether we can be Christian, about whether we can be legitimate. And the truth of the matter is that if you study the history of Christianity, you learn a lot of things about this. One of the things is that we gay people have been around all the time. And actually, we've been in the life of Christianity, in leadership roles, monks and sisters and priests and other kinds of leaders throughout the whole entire history of Christianity. We are not new on the spot. Despite what some local churches might say or what they might teach about us. And also, through academic study, it would be important for people to learn that one of the passages that people throw around, like Sodom and Gomorrah, isn't about homosexuality. It's about hospitality. But you've got to do academic study to understand the fullness of the text and its importance. Because if you grew up in a church where you never heard that message, then you're just going to teach out of your own experience. It's completely insufficient. This is why I think the newly designed MDiv program that the faculty put together is so incredibly important. It requires students to take courses and do scholarly work in areas that previous generations only took as electives. Oh, so you can take an elective class on sexuality and gender, or you could take an elective class on racism, or you could take an elective class, I'm thinking of another example, it's not coming to mind, but the truth is, now these classes are required. So a student has to take a class in gender and sexuality and theology. They have to take a class on anti-racism and Christianity. And as a matter of fact, some of the early feedback we're getting from our students has been tremendously positive, specifically about the anti-racist gospel course. Students say to us that the course both helped them understand racism within Christianity, which many people find that hard to stomach. White people sometimes don't think that Christianity is racist, but we know it has been. It's got large traditions of it. But they also came away from the course, thankfully, with a less cynical view of Christianity because they got to see the wideness of the tradition, that it's not all racist, it's not all racially biased, and there are traditions and strands and practices and theologies that are well within the tradition that are not racist. So we need students to have the fullness of that education if we want them to be educated leaders and to lead in our communities. Going to the counseling field, I have to say, and thankfully, we don't see the challenge to education quite the same way. I think similar to some other fields, people want their counselors to be educated. There may be some debates, I'm sure, among students about whether one course is really necessary or another. Do I have to take this class? Couldn't I take something else? Could it be more practical? But we also know, because the people who employ people who are therapists or counselors demand that the people who they hire have these backgrounds and are fully educated and trained. So the employers help keep the standards in place. I think understanding the significance of education is something that's really important for all of us. It's also a reminder of why scholarship funding is so important, right, Kristen? We have to raise money to support students so that they can afford to have these kinds of educational experiences. It's one thing to say it's really valuable and even to say it's required by a denomination. It's another thing to put the money up. And that's why, CTS has been historically very generous in its scholarship packages, but the truth of the matter is we need to do more. And we want to do more, and we will do more. But I think this is where all of us participate, regardless of where we are in the institution, about supporting scholarship. And when you support scholarship in students' education, then you support the communities in the church, and then you support the people in the church. So it's not just the faculty members who are in the classrooms, but it's all of us working together. The other thing is as students move through their theology and counseling degree programs, there is sometimes a delicate and, dare I say, challenging amount of inner work that the students have to do. The way I think about it is they have to adapt themselves to the demands of their vocation. And they have to do that rather than making the vocation adapt to them. Annie Dillard, some of you may be familiar, she wrote a book called The Writing Life, and in that she wrote, in working class France, when an apprentice got hurt or when he got tired, the experienced worker said, it is the trade entering his body. She goes on to say, the writer has to adapt herself to the words. The painter has to adapt themselves to the paint. It seems to me that faith leaders need to adapt themselves to the tradition, which includes not just the theological doctrines of the church or the tradition, but also the pastoral ministry and practices of the church. When I think about this, I think of my Uncle Paul, who was a disciple of Christ minister for over 60 years, pastored 40 of those years in Appalachia with a 5-point charge, 5 churches. One of the things that Uncle Paul believed in was central to the practice of ministry was the pastoral visit. Now, my Uncle Paul, if you met him, you would say, it seems a little strange because he was pretty introverted, a very quiet man, but he was on the road doing pastoral visits nearly every day. As a matter of fact, he put 50,000 miles on his car every year. So every 2 years, he was getting a new car because he was always on the road, visiting people, going to hospitals, going to care centers, going to nursing homes, going to people's homes, going to their places of work. There wasn't a place he would not go. It didn't make any difference what the conditions were, what the situation was. He was fearless in a pastoral visit. And toward the end of his life, long after he had retired, he was taken to the local ER with a heart issue. And while he was laying there in the bed with all kinds of things going on, a nurse was working with him, and she turned to him and said, "I know you." She said, "You came to our house and visited us. And our house was really nothing but a shack, but you didn't care. You came to see us anyway. You came in, you sat down, you talked with us, you visited with us, you saw us." He said, "We remember you to this day." I think of that as kind of my example of somebody who adapted themselves to the practice of ministry, even when it wasn't his most comfortable thing to do. I asked Dr. Robertson, so what about the counselor or the therapist? What do they adapt themselves to? It's not my field, so I have to rely on the professionals in the field. And Dr. Robertson shared with me that she proposed that the counselor adopts themselves to the client. She shared with me that counseling is both an art and a science. It's like a dance, she said. Most times the client leads, other times the counselor may lead. And together the relationship brings about transformation and healing. What a beautiful quote. You can see that if you've ever been in counseling, what that kind of experience is, that sort of dance between the therapist and the client. When we think about graduate education, we often think about the knowledge and skills people need, and that's true. But in our disciplines, we are just concerned about what kind of person one is. So it's not just about the information that they need to learn or the skills they need to develop, but what kind of person do they need to be? And that's really what we mean by the formation of somebody. So you can imagine this. Again, let's go back to the doctor example. You can go to a doctor who is brilliant. You can tell that they've got great skill and knowledge in their area, but their bedside manner? And while you could appreciate, and sometimes we say, okay, I'm going to set that aside because they're acting like an idiot. They're so good at their work, I'm going to tolerate that. But there's so many times like the bedside manner is so bad, I can't listen to what they have to say. It's impossible. So the formation of somebody, the disposition that they bring, the characteristics they bring is essential to the work. And we know that supervisors and faculty play a significant role in people's academic development and vocational formation in our students. But what about our staff? Because our staff also participate. What role do they play? It seems to me that they play a huge role. And it starts right in the experience of admissions and recruitment. And it goes all the way through their entire experience of CTS to the point of graduation. Every staff interaction, the way they're received, the kind of questions they get asked, the kind of answers they get in emails, the kind of conversations that they have, the availability of people, all of that feeds together into their experience. Because it's not just about transferring of information, but it's about the relationship itself. How are they received? Are they seen? Are they heard? Are they understood? A couple of examples. There's tons of examples in our community, but I think about compelling writing. It's a powerful skill and essential to every degree program that we have, not just so the professors can read better papers, but so that people can actually express themselves, can say what they want to say, and that they can polish their point of view and their position. They can strengthen their intellectual development. And David in the Writing Center does this. He helps students to express their ideas and thoughts in ways that are compelling to their readers and to their listeners. And in the process, he helps students to clarify their voice and their point of view. In the Counseling Center, another great example where students have a chance to work directly with clients, practicing what they're learning in classes, and Brian and his team teach students a number of other practical things: clinical notes, how to take good clinical notes, how to schedule with clients, how to talk about money with clients, one of Brian's popular themes. Because all these things are essential to their profession. And again, it's not only about the data, the information, and the skill. All those things are in there, but it's also it's the way in which one shows up in that process that's essential. That's the formation that's going on. So we are working on the intellectual, scholarly development of our students, as well as their formation in the profession. During their time at CTS, our students come into contact with numerous faculty and staff and supervisors. And each of us is making an impression on them. And I think if we looked at our own lives, we could say this. Every one of us here has had a positive experience of somebody who has shaped us. More than likely, it still shapes us to this day. We still go back as a touchstone to that experience. And we've also had negative ones too. And we go back to those sometimes in therapy, but sometimes also as a reminder about what not to do. Like, I remember this happened to me and I do not want to repeat that. So we know how important this is. When I look at my own life, when I was in seminary and started 40-some years ago, I think of staff members who changed my life, administrative assistants who really changed me just because of the way they greeted me in the morning. They saw me. That was enough. When I was having difficulty with a bill or trying to reach home, they were there to help. Our students need the same thing. They need to have that kind of experience from all of us. I often get asked as president, what do I want CTS to be known for? And what I'm saying right now, and it could change, but I think it's pretty consistent with my background, is that I want CTS to be known as a place where people's experience is not transactional, but relational. The people's experience of us. I'm not talking just about our students, but the people we welcome on campus, whether it be for the Compelling Preaching Initiative or for the Faith in Action events or for all the other things that we do. Do they have a relational experience with us rather than a transactional one? Because it is too easy to have those transactional kind of relationships. And I'm not saying that there isn't moments where we transfer information back and forth between people. Of course we do that. But the way in which we do that, the way in which we talk to people, the way in which we write, the way in which we receive people is that relational piece. That's our formation as well as the formation of our students. And we know that people know the difference when they experience it. I want people to walk away from CTS with that relational experience, not just because they will speak well of us, but because it will shape the way in which they act and work as a clinician, as a pastor, as a chaplain, as a community organizer. I want that experience for them and for that to flow through them. In my mind, the relational piece is what binds together the scholarly and intellectual work that our students and our participants do with their personal and professional formation. It's that relational piece that holds everything together. And without that, it seems to me that very little transformation can happen, which is really what we're about, ultimately. It's in our mission statement. So as I take my seat and finish, I want to go back to this idea about the impact that we have on individuals gets multiplied. We don't serve just the people who are in front of us. We serve all of the people that they will serve. The truth of the matter is that CTS and we, as part of it, continue to impact people across the country in multiple ways. Our work is an opportunity for each of us and for all of us to have a lasting impact on those people, whether they be students, whether they be participants, whether they be congregants or clients, we have the possibility of impacting them. When I think about that, I think, what an honor, what a privilege, what a blessing it is to serve God's transforming of the world in this way. What we do, what you do every day matters. It matters. I hope you see that too. God bless you. I'm going to invite the Dean Lozada and our panelists to come forward to the stage, and they're going to do some conversation about advancing scholarship and formation. So welcome to the stage. Ayana Garrett, Nick Peterson, Melissa Train, Brian Vota, Marty Wright.
Yes, that's right. Okay. I have the privilege to moderate a panel discussion this morning on advancing scholarship and formation. So I have to sort of mentally get myself back into this sort of teaching seminar mode, which takes a bit here. So bear with me a little bit. I've also, I think this is, when last year, in terms of reflecting on the panel as well, and I think this year as well, I think what's very helpful is to hear from various perspectives across campus, across CTSs, what people are doing in various areas, what they're doing in terms of advancing scholarship for formation. I have the privilege of seeing a lot of that comes through my office. But I also think it's very important that you hear from our esteemed panelists, how they understand advancing scholarship and formation as well. And so what I've done is give them some questions in advance just to get them prime their thinking a little bit. I've changed some of them just to mess with them. No, I did not.
I got my notes.
They were very nervous. But nothing to be nervous. I always tell my students, speak from your strength, speak from your experience. Be authentic in what you know and that sort of thing. So I'm going to start with, I'm going to pick on Brian first because he sends me the most emails.
It's probably true.
It's probably true. So Brian, in your role as director of the Counseling Center, what role do you see the counseling community play in channeling the mental health process at CTS? And how are these incorporated into our seminary programs?
So this is an interesting question. I want to look at it kind of two ways. I want to look at it how our community comes to the counseling center, but then how our students, our clinicians really, develop themselves, are developed while being real agents of change for the community. Okay, so hopefully this has been said a lot, but the counseling center for particularly our student interns, when we say it's a unique experience, it really is. It is a unicorn. If you look at other institutions, master's level, doctoral level, they don't have training programs like we have here at CTS, okay? And I'm trying to emphasize this because to someone not in the field, it may not really hit how significant that is. So if you go to another university that doesn't have a program like ours, they're going to kind of farm out their clinical internships to community mental health centers, places like these, our students get supervision from their professors who are teaching them in the classroom, and me, okay? And other really good clinicians in the community that we bring in to supervise our students. And at the same time, they make a real difference in the community because they're providing real therapy to people. Okay, when I say real therapy, I mean real therapy. We have the flexibility to meet people where they are, okay? If they're out in the community, which is under-resourced, they may not be able to get seen enough to really promote real change in their lives, okay? I say this a lot. Our clinicians, they are in training, but they're prolific, okay? I almost used the word dangerous, but that didn't seem like a good word to talk about with clinicians, right? We don't want them to be dangerous, but they're prolific, yeah.
Tell the audience how many sessions we had last year.
Can somebody help me? It was at least 11,000.
11,000.
It was at least 11,000.
Yeah, that came through the counseling center.
Which is a tremendous amount.
Yeah. Yeah, so you can begin to see the impact of the work that we're doing in the CTS, they're doing in the CTS Counseling Center that's reaching beyond simply, not our students, beyond into the community. I think that's sort of leaning into Dr. Malat's comments a little earlier. Let me turn to Melissa. Melissa, from your experience, seeing, working with adjuncts, working with faculty, working with staff, how do you see the impact of our scholarly work, particularly within our academic community and the practice of ministry?
One of the things I was thinking of through Dr. Malat's talk, as well as what Brian just said, is a lot of times people see technology as peripheral to the learning. Here's a technology over here and it better work because I'm going to teach this. And one of the things that we try to do here is integrate it. How is the technology going to enhance your teaching? How is the technology going to enhance your learning? What is the purpose of each technology that we use? Not just having a technology for the sake of saying, oh, we use this special technology here at CTS, but technology that adds value to the learning and to the teaching. And that takes a lot of training. That takes a lot of adapting of both students and faculty to how we've always done it, how we've always taught or learned. But it also allows for a lot of opportunities, because if we can somehow do it well, if we can have relationships with each other through the technology, we have Zoom classes, we have, even in the counseling center, we have the Zoom sessions. If it's working, we can make those connections. And going back to the relationships that we have, that's very important, and learning how to use the technology, how to facilitate it to learn and to teach in even a new way for all of us.
Thank you. Ayana. I work with Ayana a lot. And so lucky me. Ayana, can you talk a little bit about our programs, our specific student life programs, our activities that you understand fostering personal formation, spiritual formation, academic formation as well?
Well, I can think of a few programs that certainly foster the spiritual formation. For students, there are student devotionals that are released every week. Student-led devotionals. Ray Kareem, a D-Min student that works with me, she leads that coordination. And she also recruits students of diverse backgrounds to lead these devotionals to help inspire and strengthen our students spiritually. I also serve on the chapel committee, and we work very hard in order to bring about programming that is enriching to students. So there are diverse preachers that come and inspire students in our community, diverse music, and different ways of worship that we like to expose students to. So that's some of the things that we do in regards to spiritual formation. In the past, we've done retreats as well for students. In regards to personal formation, I would say, let's see, personal formation, I would say things like the student council and student groups help to develop leadership skills among students, help to develop interpersonal skills that are very important for students in the careers that they are seeking, in the vocation in which they are seeking. And in regards to academic formation, we have sponsored events such as anti-racism training in the past. We are thinking about programs now in regards to inviting theologians to come in and to talk about things that are current that may impact not only students but the people that they counsel and serve in a ministry context. So.
From time to time, I'll call her and she'll say, Dean, can I call you back in 15 minutes? I'm with a student. That's personal formation for me, having that relational experience with students.
Yeah, and it's something that I take for granted because,
Mm-hmm.
hey, you do it every day.
Yeah.
And I hope to model that for students so that they may also go out into the world and are relational with the people that they counsel and that they minister to.
Okay, good. Nicole? Nicole from New Orleans. She reminds me all the time.
Who that?
And she's even wearing the colors. So, Nicole, can you talk a little bit more about the role the schools of theology and counseling sort of play together, function together in advancing scholarship, as from your perspective? Because I know you've dealt with some paired degree students and that sort of thing. How do you sort of see that advancing scholarship information from your standpoint?
I thought about this question, and I thought about the ways in which I was engaged in advancing scholarship as well. So I see maybe a few opportunities that that have emerged in my time here. So one particularly deals with the terminal degrees, our doctoral degrees, where individuals from the School of Counseling and School of Theology collaborate together to help our students as they are working on their DMin projects. I've served as an advisor in that capacity with a couple of students to really be able to help them understand the impact of the clinical work on their ministry work. Also, we have opportunities to work with our PhD students as well. I've served in capacity around being a methodologist to be able to help them understand their research design and how their particular research projects are advancing scholarship in their particular fields of interest, be it homiletics, be it sacred rhetoric, in those areas. As well, we've had opportunities for our School of Theology faculty members to participate in our master's level students' capstone projects, which is an opportunity to be able to mentor them and help our students to understand theological themes and how those theological themes and their own theological perspective impacts the clinical work. And so in their final projects, they're able to integrate not only the clinical perspective, but theological elements in their scholarship to be able to determine how the work went with their clients. And so that's one way. I envision possibly for the future, as we think about collaborating even more on collaborating in research, collaborating in co-teaching, so that our opportunities to advance scholarship can be found even more profound in the classroom setting. So that's how I see it.
Let me follow up with something. So when you're talking, I kept on thinking, without naming names, who's that one student that comes to your memory that reflects the advancing scholarship formation? Is there anyone, and why? Maybe I put you on the spot there. That wasn't one of the questions I gave her in advance.
Where I see it evidence, I think I would say some of our dual degree students at a master's level or paired degree, as it's identified now. I see elements of how that integration of theology and psychotherapy comes into play and is integrated very well in their scholarship. But I can also identify a student for whom spirituality was not their niche at all. And they were able to integrate it in their clinical work profoundly in their capstone project. One of the ones that we use as an example of, well, spirituality may not be the thing that you are quote unquote into, but here's an example of how a student can work with a mentor to be able to understand how they can integrate something that they believe is foreign to them. So I think there are two opportunities there.
Thank you. Nick? I was hoping that you might talk a little bit more about our PhD program, African American Preaching and Sacred Rhetoric program, and any other program such as CPI, any sort of the Mixed Methods Preaching Conference that's coming up. Any of that, of how that sort of might play a role within advancing scholarship information? Anything you would like to share on that?
Yeah, a couple of things. One is oftentimes historically when the notion of scholarship is put on the table, we have a figure about what scholarship looks like, who produces knowledge. And I learned in my graduate program the importance of bibliographies, which obviously leans into the importance of writing. And you can't cite things that haven't been written. And so one of the things across, I think, all of our programs, but especially our PhD program, the work that we're doing with CPI and the like, is we are encouraging and empowering our students to mine their own experiences, mine the context from which they've emerged, and basically theorize, the knowledges that they've been immersed in that have shaped them. And to add that to the canon of particularly homiletics, the homiletical canon, but to do so in ways that are meaningful for lived communities. And so scholarship is not simply, or not sort of an exclusive enterprise where the only way we can be a scholar is to quote the same 10 people across the field. But there are things that we've learned from our experiences, and some of what we are training students to do is to read those experiences in ways that yield to knowledge production. How do we name the experiences that you had at your grandmother's table? How do you name in ways that are productive for a larger conversation that can reach generations to come? The kind of creativity that encapsulated the homiletical tradition you were exposed to. What's really cool with our CPI program, which is modeled after the PhD program in many respects, is that we have preachers, homileticians, who are readily engaged in the practice of preaching. And so if you were to ask them, right now, you could just, here's a text, you got 5 minutes, and they would do wonders working the text because that's the muscle that they've exercised. On the back end of the CPI program, which is sort of similar to our PhD, is that we are expecting our exemplars to produce a text that's not a sermon, but that informs the practice of preaching that they would then share with members of their community. right? So folks who they will mentor and the like. And for many, that is a hard transition. And part of why that transition is hard, and I think scholarship formation is important, there's a difference between really being able to use your technology well, right? You can use your iPhone or your Galaxy really, really well, but there's a different orientation that you have when you're trying to understand, how does this device work? How do you actually produce this kind of device? And that's oftentimes the way that we're taking people who are readily informed by a practice and now trying to help them sort of gain a perspective that moves just from the practice of usage to now sort of understanding how this works. And that's the transition from scholar to practitioner, but also maintaining a commitment to usefulness. And so I think that that's something that we are doing well across the range of our programs. It's an orientation that I have with the students that I'm working with in DMIN programs, and as well as our School of Counseling students and School of Theology students. That oftentimes it's a matter of, how do I gain a perspective that allows me not to just serve on the front end of using the information, but also understanding the information's production itself, like how that information comes to be. So,
I wish I was 20 years younger. You can begin to witness a different generation coming into the field of theological education with another knowledge base of technology, which is something I've appreciated hearing from some of our newer faculty. This is his second year here at CTS. Thank you. Okay. Martin, supervised ministry. Tell us about supervised ministry. Perhaps most people don't know much about it. Maybe they participated, didn't like it, that sort of thing. But how does that sort of play into formation?
So I'm not a geologist, but I understand this truth about stalactites and stalagmites. They are formed over a long period of time. And formation, I think, doesn't happen quickly. In fact, in 3 years, none of us leave here totally formed, right? There's a formation that's lifelong. Mm-hmm. Supervised ministry is unique because it gives us a moment to connect, oftentimes, students who are either at the beginning or the middle of their formation, frequently with mentors who are on the other end of that spectrum most of the time. They're coming into those years where they're very formed, right? There's a lot of strength. The column is wide, if you will. There's a lot that they've learned, and they have a lot to share. And so in supervised ministry, there are several points of formation. One of them is the relationship between students and their mentors. When a student enters our supervised ministry program, every week they sit down for an hour to an hour and a half with a mentor. Usually it's the senior pastor of the church they're serving, but not always. Someone who has life experience, real world experience, and they discuss the tasks that they've been assigned, the things that are happening, but more than that, what are the theological ramifications of that and the practical ramifications of that, right? It's that theology that Dr. Malat spoke about earlier, right? This theology and how we deal with the person who's dying. And when you're a student and you really have to face that in the real world, that's different than the textbook, right? Mm-hmm. Even though we're learning about it, there's something very real about being face-to-face and holding a hand. Mm-hmm. And so the mentor has a chance to be very much someone who's speaking into and helping with that kind of formation in the student. That's pretty special. Mm-hmm. The mentor, we say, has to deliver the hard truth too sometimes. Part of formation is that sometimes, we're imperfect and we don't always get it the right way, or at least it's open to critique, and the mentor gets that opportunity. The second thing that happens as a point of contact, of course, is our students are serving in a church setting, but we create what's called a ministerial support committee. If the mentor has to share some of the hard truths, the MSC team is kind of the cheerleader. They're there to encourage you, to help you navigate life and ministry in church. And so once a month, for an hour to an hour and a half, students sit down with a 4 or 5 member team from the church or congregation, who's the MSC team, and they help navigate some things about student life. What concerns do you have? They encourage them, and it lets the student learn, usually from 4 or 5 other members of the congregation, a little bit more about what congregational life is like from the perspective of congregational leaders, not the senior pastor, not the lead pastor or minister, but from people who are in the church or in the trenches, we might say, getting the job done. That's a point of contact, a point of formation. There's a third kind of formation that happens, and that's our students have a lot of agency in what churches they end up in. We don't say, hey, you have to go to this church or that church per se. Usually they have a lot of influence, a lot of agency in where they end up. Now, some students think that the church they're going to is their dream church, only to find out, I don't think that's really where I wanted to be. And that happens sometimes. But most of the time, the student has some agency where they end up. But there's this beautiful thing that happens, and that is oftentimes, as our perspectives about a congregation change, it's because of the people they work with every week. And frequently, our students have one idea that they think is the ideal kind of ministry. And oftentimes, by the end of our course of time together, a year or 2 years, they have a new understanding, a new formation, if you would, about their theology of ministry and what it should look like. And so that's a remarkable transformation that we do get to see happen. I should point this out. I would say that probably 7 out of 10 students who come into supervised ministry do so reluctantly, and it's an experience they don't really hope to have. It's something that's required that they do, and yet we know from the data after they've attended and they've been through it 4 or 5 years out, oftentimes, it's one of their favorite experiences at seminary. And so there definitely is kind of formation that takes place. There's one last piece that's pretty unique, and I think it's this one, to me, one of the most important parts of formation, and that is that in supervised ministry, students have to meet for an hour to an hour and a half with their peers every month. And we get to sit down in this dialogue where students bring the challenges that they're facing, talk about how they've dealt with them within the church, and then their peers give feedback. This is what I think about that. This is what I would do if I were in your situation. And oftentimes, the greatest formation that I see happens in those peer-to-peer meetings. In fact, I think that's one of the best parts of my job here, is I get to sit in the room when I listen to students really tease out and wrestle through how do we overcome challenges in ministry. And that there's some real genius that happens among them, because they're having to, in real time, in a real world of technology, of a real world of modern problems, modern situations, say and answer the question, how does this matter now? And how does it inform how we treat each other and how we move forward? And it's pretty spectacular to be part of that. That's a neat, I know someone else would probably love to have that job. It's a great job to have. I love that position and getting to be with the students doing that. So there are several points of formation that I see happening in the program. The saddest part of my job is that there are more churches wanting students than we have students to give to the churches. And so many churches would love to have one of our students, but we just don't have enough students to go around right now.
Thank you. What you're hearing is this theme, if I may lift up the theme of your remarks, Dr. Malat, is the theme of relationship and relational in terms of formation. And one can see it. If you take the hilo, the thread, and sort of weave it into between all of these, you're getting counseling center, IT, student life, CMHC program, preaching, and supervised ministry. And that thread is through, it's being pulled throughout the entire CTS environment. And I think that's powerful. And that's what I was trying to get across, is we're all on this journey of helping students move, or at least emphasizing the advancing of scholarship and formation. As we begin to conclude, I'm just curious, how has students impacted your scholarship and formation? Because it's relational. If we're going to say relational, it's just not one way, it's both way. So I'll start with Brian and we'll go across.
I often tell my students that if I'm not learning from them, then I have a problem, okay? Because if we're not learning, if we're not open to being transformed in the teacher role, then we're just going to be doing what Dr. Peterson said, and we're just going to be quoting the same people over and over and over again. We have to continue to be new. I have one of our postgraduate residents. One of the ways that I kind of deal with being bored is I just am reading something constantly, but she puts me to shame. She reads more than me, and there are times where I have to ask her, like, hey, explain this thing to me. And so we develop really good thinkers here at CTS, people who have a thirst and a hunger to know more. We were in our postgraduate residency group yesterday, and I had the privilege of kind of doing this impromptu teaching session on these pretty complicated psychoanalytic concepts. And this is a group comprised of both CMHC program graduates, but also MFT graduates, okay? And I have the MFT students who, this is not a concept that's really emphasized in MFT theory, but they were asking for more of it, okay? And then we'll have a CMHC graduate bring a case, and their work is being enriched by the perspectives that the MFT clinicians are bringing, NAJ and contextual family therapy. And so, Dr. Brager and I are really enriched by the ideas that our students bring. So it really feels like this kind of, I'm thinking of really fertile soil that we have here at CTS that has the potential to really nourish all of us.
Sorry.
I don't know, maybe this is very functional for what we do, but I feel that I'm challenged in my customer service skills every day. And maybe we don't think of students and faculty as customers, but meeting people where they are. And it's a constant, for me, it's a constant needing to rethink how I approach people and how I respond to people when they are in the midst of a crisis for them. And for me, I might not think it's a crisis, but I have to rethink how I think, rethink and put myself in their shoes and think, they can't log in. That's their crisis. Or the Zoom room is not working, that's their crisis. Or the microphone is not working, that's their crisis in the moment. And so it's just a reminder that we have to be compassionate and meet people where they are in the moment, and even remove all the other stuff from my head of that I think is more important, and just help this person who's right in front of me.
Well, when you asked that question, I thought of the spring semester and the surveys that I sent out to students about community and focus groups in regards to community. And so students are really teaching me about vibrant community and forcing me to, well, I won't say forcing, but encouraging me to read more, to research more about how to create vibrant community in a environment like CTS. So I would say definitely they are encouraging me to learn more about them and what works for them, and how they best do community here at CTS.
This is a question often I encounter in the classroom setting. I'm thinking about one of the classes that I teach is a research methods class, and it has statistics involved. My brain being a computer programmer in the past, logic is not something that's foreign to me. Math is not something that's foreign to me. But for our counseling students that have not really had that type of exposure, it is terror. And so I try my best to, a little bit of what Melissa said, is to understand where they are. But what I set as a expectation from the beginning in the class is this is a learning lab. This is where we both learn. You learn from me, but I also have the opportunity to learn from you in the ways in which you encounter things. So when I see people almost in tears just to get an average of numbers, I'm like, we can do this as a group. and figure out what this might look like. And so I think the opportunity to know that you're learning, but I'm learning too, level sets some of the anxiety around the experience.
Yeah, I think, twofold. One part is, as a teacher, part of what we are doing is helping our students to know how, right? How to produce scholarship, how to read, how to write. But we aren't content experts at everything. And one of the beauties of being at a place like CTS, which is different than being at a large denominational seminary attached to, a university in that respect, is that there's a lot of diversity in a very small cohort. And with that, particularly even this term, I'm teaching the Intro to Worship course, I cannot teach DOC worship, and that suffice, right? I can't just teach the AME liturgies or PCUSA practices in common worship. And that would suffice, because our community, even though it's small, is really, really diverse. And so much of what I'm having to do is to teach my students how to think about and how to recognize the theological convictions from their own traditions. And I learn from them what those theological convictions are and what the particular practices are, both that are local to their own context, but that are also germane to their traditions. I'm very familiar with my tradition because I practiced it regularly. I'm less familiar with other traditions. And so even though I'm teaching worship, much of what I'm teaching students is really how to think theologically about these rituals and practices, and understanding their genealogies throughout the church throughout time. But I'm learning from them what this looks like on the ground. I'm learning from them and with them how practices are regionalized and adapted to different contexts. And then you scope that out to our doctoral students across our various doctoral programs. They are producing significant bodies of knowledge where it's like, yeah, I've read Howard Thurman's sermons and I've read Howard Thurman's texts, but I have not engaged in this kind of rhetorical analysis of Howard Thurman within a university context and as a university preacher. And so we're learning with our students even as we're teaching them how to do things. And so I'm excited about that. The other piece of that is that our students do come with a lifetime of experience. And so one of my pedagogical clauses within the syllabus, the part the students typically don't read, but I make it a point to speak to it, is that we all come in here as experts in our lived experience. And as someone who teaches and practices, part of where we can start to cultivate the chops to understand how we analyze practice is by looking at our own practices, right? So with that, enabling students to see that your previous experiences are not a waste for the type of work that we're doing now, and that you don't have to disavow what you learned previously in order to learn in this context. And so those are things that I'm excited to sort of learn to do together with my students.
Thank you. Martin, you have the last word.
Oh, wow. If I've learned anything from geology, it's that stalactites and stalagmites are very inflexible. They're formed, they're just not very flexible. The same thing, I think, happens to ministers after a long time in ministry. And we can become somewhat inflexible and no longer able to really respond to current issues. We get trapped in a time capsule, if you would. And I think one of the beauties that I get to have from my students and the conversations we have, one of the things that's just so beautiful is that it allows me, even though I'm still a minister, I'm still preaching every week, it allows me to have a greater perspective of what's happening now and to not fall into that kind of silo thinking or that fixed thinking, but to recognize, hey, faith has to have a certain amount of fluidity to it, has to speak to this moment, to this time. And the students I get a great deal from that, and that's a benefit to me and the congregation I continue to serve. Yeah.
Let's give them a round of applause. They were willing to come up here and share their perspectives with you, and on behalf of the CTS community, I want to thank you very much for for taking the time and sharing with us your thoughts and your experience here. At this time, we'll turn it over to the installation. So, thank you.
They're taking their seats. Let's do another round of applause for our panelists, Nadim Lozada. I invite Dr. Davis to come forward. You sit right in the stand in the middle. Friends of God, we are called by the one Spirit into one body and given gifts for a variety of ministries for the common good. Our purpose is to install this scholar, teacher, and formator to the special ministry to which he has been called at Christian Theological Seminary.
I'm delighted to present to the seminary community our newest faculty member, Reverend Lane E. Davis. Dr. Davis joined CTS as Assistant Professor of Church History and United Methodist Studies and the Director of the United Methodist Studies. This July, Dr. Davis holds a PhD in History of the Christian Tradition from Southern Methodist University with a dissertation titled Educating a Denomination, Albert C. Outler and American Theological Education, 1925 to 1974. He was supervised by Dr. Ted Campbell, who is the Albert C. Outler Professor of Wesley Studies at SMU. I mention that because he's a very important person, so in Methodist Studies. Dr. Davis is also an ordained elder in the United Methodist Church. Previously, Dr. Davis was an assistant professor of religion at Huntington College in Alabama, and his pedagogical skills shows with that teaching at an undergraduate education school will force you to learn how to teach fast. Dr. Davis has already demonstrated his dedication to advancing Methodist education and leadership since arriving here at CTS. He has taught a course on church development, starting fresh in a changing world. And he's currently teaching a United Methodist history and doctrine class this semester. I have seen him meeting with students already. Also meeting with the outside United Methodist community. And he's already provided me with valuable information regarding the United Methodist coursework. What I'm trying to say is that his presence is felt. I'm sure that his extensive expertise in Methodist studies, teaching, and research will greatly enhance CTS's programs and support our mission of developing transformative leaders. We look forward to his contributions in deepening the understanding of the Methodist tradition for both students and faculty. Welcome.
Dear Dr. Davis, you have been called by God and chosen by the community of Christian Theological Seminary to teach and learn with your faculty colleagues and students. This ministry is a blessing and a serious responsibility. It recognizes your special gifts and calls you to work among us and for us. In love, we thank you for accepting your obligation and challenge you to offer your best to God, to the students, to the CTS community, and to our mission. Live a life worthy of your calling and make known our values of affirming God-given human dignity, working toward the justice for all, embracing diversity, advancing scholarship and formation, and promoting healing and wholeness throughout all creation.
You have been called to serve as faculty member of the Christian Theological Seminary. Will you love God and neighbor as you perform your ministry?
I will.
Will you devote yourself to the service of teaching and learning, both within the community of Christian Theological Seminary and in the world?
I will.
Will you so live that you enable the seminary to be a community of respect, compassion, equity, and justice?
I will.
Do you commit yourself to being a collegial member of the faculty, supporting the lives and work of your peers?
And will you do all in your power to be responsible to the task for which you have been chosen?
Dear friends of God, rejoice that God provides laborers for the vineyards. Will you do all you can to assist and encourage Dr. Davis in the responsibilities to which he has been called, and giving him your cooperation, your counsel, and your prayers? Let us pray. Almighty God, pour out your blessings upon this your servant, who has been given the opportunity and responsibility to be an educator in the seminary, the church, and the wider community. Grant him grace and joy as he gives himself wholeheartedly in your service. Keep before him the example of Christ, who lived his life as a teacher, prophet, and healer. Guide him in his work. Reward his faithfulness with the knowledge that he is serving your transformation of the world. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen. In the name of Christian Theological Seminary, I now commission you as an installed member of the faculty. Congratulations. Glad you're here. Just stay where you can stay there. Okay. So thank you, everybody, for being here this morning. Val has prepared a wonderful reception for us in the common room. I encourage you to join everybody out there and socialize and enjoy the reception. And have a great centennial year. God bless you.